resume the board meeting. It is time for the chair's report, and I'm not very good at following the outline because I missed on the regular board meeting outline. I missed kind of our first thing was to a little bit more of introduction for our new board member, Brooke. And I've known Brooke for a number of years. We've worked together with Brooke at a client. So Brooke, would you like to say a few words about yourself? Maybe not.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Are you talking to me, Mark?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of started. I was apologizing for not introducing you properly. I just wanted to know if you just wanted to say a few things about yourself for the other board members.
Sure. I heard you say that we've worked together before, and I have had the pleasure when I worked for Swedish. So I'm glad to be working with this group. I've been watching your activity for a little while. And Elizabeth Mazanari, a former board member, is a friend of mine, and she recommended that I apply to be a member. And so I'm very happy to be here with all of you. I work for a small consulting firm that my best friend started about a year ago. It's a strategic and organizational design advising firm, and my background has been in healthcare for many years. So that's a little bit about me. I've worked with several of the healthcare organizations around the state, and I'm now working in a different capacity and enjoying the advising space and working with a lot of different clients, both in many different industries, not just healthcare at this point. So at any rate, have been enjoying being part of the WSCPA and working with getting to know Kimberly Scott and Ashley and others there, and happy to work with all of you and look forward to this experience. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, welcome aboard. I think you'll be a great board member.
Thank you.
This is a year of hellos. It's also a year of goodbyes. Bruce, I think is this your last meeting with us, Bruce? Maybe Bruce is. Okay.
Yeah, now I'm unmuted.
Is this your last meeting with us, Bruce?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's hard to believe. I actually started as board prosecutor in 2006.
Oh, fabulous. Well, we really appreciate, we look forward to working with Michelle, and we really appreciate all the great work you've done for us, and you in the AG's office, and your support of the board over the years. So again, we look forward to working with Michelle, but it's been great. I just want to say thank you.
Well, thanks. It's been super interesting to work with this board and to get to meet all the board members. It's always the best part of these assignments for me is getting to meet the board members from outside state government.
So thanks, Bruce. Other thing, Chair's report, NASBA regional meeting. The NASBA regional meeting was held, I think it was June. It was virtual. We had a lot of board members attending, so I just want to thank everyone for attending that NASBA regional meeting. Those are really interesting meetings to see. Just the politics are interesting, but to see the profession at kind of a national level and see new issues. So it's good it's virtual, so you'd have to travel. You don't get as much networking, kind of meeting other boards face to face. When you go to these meetings, you kind of realize these people are like your cousins. But it's nice not to have to travel. And that's going to happen again for the NASBA annual meeting, which is in November, is now going to be virtual as well, since everyone in NASBA is in the high-risk population age. So that's going to be virtual. So if you can block out those dates, you can look on their website. I think it's 2 days, including the day of the presidential election, but you can block out those 2 days. It'll certainly be good information. If you're a CPA, you can get CPE for it, and it's absolutely free. So except for your time. So I get that on your calendar. We mentioned the brief adjudicative proceeding process, and Bruce talked about that. Taylor's going to talk about that a little bit later. And so these are kind of these hearings for certain kind of administrative actions specified in the rule. As I mentioned, we've had 2 of these in the last year. I, as chair, have done it. It's really, you get a file, you review the file, you tell the AG's office of your decision, and then they issue kind of a letter, which is an order to that person. The 2 I reviewed were denials of license applications. As board chair, one of my goals is to not only be respectful of your time, but to make this interesting for you. Make this interesting, and disciplinary actions are interesting. And so I'm going to start a practice of delegating those BAP hearings to various board members. You'll see in Taylor's enforcement report, he's added a new section called the CBM report, which shows, and we only have the last quarter, but we're going to do it cumulatively, by board member, who's been involved in CBM cases where there's been no action, CBM cases when there's actions, and now there's a column for BAP. And my goal as chair, and to kind of start the impressive chair, is kind of spreading those around to make sure everyone's involved in disciplinary actions. CBM cases, it's not always going to be equal between board members. Some people have more time, some people have less time. The goal of having such a great diverse board is so the staff can find a CBM who maybe has some specialized knowledge that would be helpful in that case. So it's never going to be a situation with CBMs being completely balanced out, but the brief adjudicated proceeding process is a way that I, as chair, or the chair, can kind of balance out and make sure everyone's being given interesting work. And as Taylor will talk about, CPE deficiencies are now going to be routed through that process rather than the regular process, so there'll be more of those hearings. So Taylor will be talking about that in his report. Committee task force reports, we'll have those in a moment. I'd like to start a kind of tradition of always reporting. We have a tradition hanging over from the old days in which we had many committees. Literally, we'd have hundreds of committees that would never do anything. And so we pared those down just to committees that we need to conduct board business between meetings. Therefore, I'd like all those committees, the chairs of those committees, whatever committee or task force you're on, to always at least give some report. It could be a written report, it could be a verbal report, but to always report at every board meeting. I also would like to suggest we form a new task force. Of course, Charles is retiring at the end of the year, and it's an interesting situation. Charles, we don't hire Charles. Charles was hired by the governor's office, but we'll have some input into the process. And I think Charles, in his report, will talk about that process a little bit more to kind of focus on the input as there's a search for a new executive director. I'd like to form a new task force, the succession task force, to kind of be the group that works with that, works on kind of in an advisory role, I guess, to the governor's office as needed, as asked for on the search for a new executive director. And Joel has graciously agreed to be chair of that task force. And so it's so of course need more than one person to be on that task force. Would anybody else be interested in that? You don't have to decide now. Charles is going to talk about a little bit what that committee task force may be asked to do. But if anyone is interested in being involved in that task force, you can speak up now, or you could contact me later on too. So I don't know if anyone's interested in participating now and wants to. Board members want to identify themselves now as being on the task force.
Brian Thomas.
Thank you, Brian.
This is Carol. I would, if there's space, I would love to be a part of it.
Absolutely.
This is Kate Dixon. Same.
Okay. And
Mark?
Yeah.
This is Raji. Do you have a sense for how big the committee is going to be?
I think we need to make sure. I think on all these committees, since the goal is they're doing something between meetings, I think we have to be careful so they don't have more than, we may have to shrink it down more, at least if they have 4 board members, a certain number of board members, they are subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. Is that 4? I think. I'm not certain.
I think that's correct. You just don't want to have a quorum. That triggers the Open Public Meetings Act.
Okay, so that would be 5. So we need 4. I think we've got 4 now.
We've got 4 now. That's right.
Okay, so we'll go with
Right,
those.
okay.
Okay. Beyond that, it gets problematic. So thank you, everyone. And so Joel, you're going to be chair of that task force as well. And Charles will give more information in his section of the report. Committee task force reports, exec committee, we met by phone, and primarily what we meet is to talk about the agenda, upcoming kind of agendas and activities of the board, but primarily we meet to discuss the agenda and what will be on the agenda for the upcoming meeting. So we did meet, and any comments we have are already reflected in the agenda. Jackie, the peer review oversight committee.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. We as a broader committee did not meet this quarter, but with that said, there was some activity by myself as the chair, along with Charles as the executive director. Since the last board meeting in April, we reviewed peer review reports for 5 firms, and those 5 firms had reports that came back as either passed with deficiencies or failed. And for all 5 of those reports, we review the corrective action, and we were in agreement with it, hence no need to take it to the broader committee. And then additionally, we did receive 2 reports from our PROC representatives, which is, again, as a reminder, Robert Lowe and Laura Lindell. Their reports covered meetings that were held in late May, covering a system review and the engagement report acceptance body. No concerns with the items reviewed, and I think overall that the current process is working as needed.
Thank you. And if anyone's kind of new to the board or the peer review process, which is a really interesting process, about a year or so ago, if you go back into our old board meetings and the old board agendas, we kind of did a detailed dive into kind of what is peer review, what are the issues in peer review. So if anyone has any questions about the process or want a copy of we had like a handout, we had a PowerPoint presentation and a long handout describing the process, please let me know. I'd be happy to give that to everyone. It was kind of a learning experience for me putting it together to get a good understanding of peer review. Joel, the ROC, the Request Oversight Committee.
The Rock, I love it. When I was first asked to chair The Rock, I thought it was a feature in Rolling Stone magazine, so I was pumped up about it. But it's almost as exciting, though. So the Rock, we cover kind of 4 different areas. The first one everybody's pretty familiar with, and that is just the approval of new names, new board names. It's fun, it's playful sometimes, but really, Jen kind of looks at them and says, "This looks good. What do you think?" And what we're looking for there is anything that might be misleading or misrepresenting. We don't want any firms that say guaranteed return or anything like this. So you'll notice in the notes that there were a few that we approved that were not yawn enforcing, but they're pretty basic. So we got through those this last quarter. Another thing that we do is we look at public records requests, and I think this is important. The first quarter, but this last quarter, we had one request which was from an educational firm. We took a look at it and approved it. And what this is it's giving access to a third party to the database so that they can solicit for CPE or for educational courses. And that's generally pretty good. Next time we're going to have one we're going to talk about in more detail, because we did have one we turned down, but I'll leave that as a cliffhanger for you. And that's a good discussion point. Also, the late fee waivers, which we've had several over this past quarter, and a lot of it has to do with COVID. And so the team has been pretty lenient on allowing people with the right request to waive the late fees, because there has been a lot of chaos, as we all know. So those are the primary things we've been doing. Nothing too exciting at the Rock. Kind of a wrap for now. Questions? Thoughts? And yes, I'm on my boat, in case anybody's curious. and we'll leave that. I'll turn that off.
This is Tom, and I just want to say, Joel, I appreciate your leadership of the Rock. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's very solid leadership, isn't it? Of the Rock. Cheap pun intended. All right, and now I'm moving on to Brian and then the sock.
Okay, the total sum of the quarter's activity was a single exchange of email with Monette Anderson from the society who leads the scholarship program. And I had about three bullets that she sent me. One, the checks for this year's scholarships are currently being mailed in order to meet the fall tuition deadlines. Monette will present the budget at the next board meeting in October for next year, and then the application process will go live in early fall. Some additional couple points. The magazine Washington CPA that just came out this summer, the 2020 edition, has all the pictures, the names, the schools of each scholarship recipient. A very interesting thing to flip pages through if you'd like to take a look. It just came in the mail in the last week or two. And then finally, speaking on a very personal note, if you have time to consider being a scholarship reviewer, I've been fully engaged for 2 different years, and then for a 3rd year, kind of as a relief pitcher, a call in for specific additional reviews when they felt they needed another set of eyes. Quite a humbling experience, because I wouldn't even have been in a place to even apply in my youth. So when the call comes out and you have time to do that, and just interacting with seeing some great applications and just the skill set of the people that are involved throughout the state is a humbling experience. Are there any questions?
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, read that article in the WCPA. These are impressive people. And if you have the time, volunteer as a reviewer. I think the average GPA of this group is like 37 or something. I mean, these are really impressive people. So I think it's probably a very humanistic experience and very encouraging. The Title Reform Task Force, of which I'm the chair, we are moving forward with the plan to introduce legislation in the next legislative session. During this last quarter, the staff did a rules rewrite. We've already rewritten we've already done the legislation, and once the legislation is passed, then it's time to amend the administrative rules. But the rule rewrite has already been done. Everyone who worked on that did a really fantastic, great job, and it has been reviewed by the task force. Again, as a reminder, the term CPN active is woven into about every statute we have, and it's woven into about every rule we have. So it's really a massive project, either the new statute or the rules, just by volume. Charles, did you have anything you wanted to add about sponsorship or anything?
Yes, let me just say that we were tasked with kind of developing the elevator speech for this particular bill. That is at the governor's office, policy office, and as soon as we get feedback from that, we'll be good and cleared to go ahead and work obtaining legislative sponsors. So that I need to kind of circle back with John Flanagan at the governor's policy office and see where that is at. There's a lot of tumult, of course, with the COVID virus, and that has taken all the oxygen out of the room there up at the governor's office.
Thank you. So yeah, we're still moving forward with, I think, tentatively plan is to run it in this upcoming legislative session. And Charles, time for your report.
Again, I apologize for the noise. I'll try to be really brief. Let me kind of just dovetail with the discussion about the regarding the transition with respect to the executive director's position. I did communicate with the governor's office. Alger is the contact who's taken over Keith Swenson's position. I had a long discussion with her, and kind of how it's going to work is that I do need to submit my letter of resignation to the governor's office, which I will do the first part of this next coming month. At that point, they will start crafting the job announcement. The job announcement, I do have the questions from the previous recruitment, and they're going to search for the recruitment up there to see if they have a copy of it. I don't know if they do or not. But in any case, that recruitment is crafted to the governor's office and provided to the board for review. So that's where the committee will come into play. And I think at that point in time, it's up to the committee to kind of pick a representative and kind of stay in the back pocket of the governor's office to kind of, make sure that the contact is maintained, that they don't forget about it, and, that if there is a recommendation or something or some input to be given, that's the time to do it. So I think it's kind of, just tending that field a little bit to make sure that you are kind of getting your point across the governor's office about what you need. And they will take recommendations. I mean, they do work off a lot of the times that I've been involved with, recruiting board members. They take that very seriously. So I think the obverse situation is kind of happening, and I think will be input from the board be very important to them. Certainly as it is with the stakeholders, society and WATIP would have input on the executive director position as well. So getting to the budget, a couple of things are going on, and there is a lot happening right now with respect to state government, with respect to COVID, the response to all this whole thing, and primarily it's how it's affecting the economy. We were tasked with developing a proposal for a 50% reduction in expenditures for our agency to be implemented in the next biennium. And it's predicated on kind of an assumption that our agency would be asked to do that. In speaking to our budget person, Paul Vitar, it is perhaps unlikely we would actually be asked to do that. So far at this particular point in time, our revenue has not noticeably been decreased. It's sort of an odd thing that people will tend to renew their CPA licenses or reinstate them when the economy goes bad because they want that credential to be competitive. So that's kind of what we're experiencing at this particular time. I'm looking at the projection. The last time Paul got one to me, it was a few months ago. It was in May. And it looks like our in the current biennium, the 1921 biennium, we should be operating a little bit of a surplus of about $190,000. So we've been really good about our expenditures, and we have identified things going forward that we're going to reduce. Certainly travel is one of them. Some of the little benefits we've had with respect to, memberships and whatnot for staff are going to be curtailed going forward. And the primary point of identifying those cuts is to make sure that we are, playing with the rest of the state agencies that are affected by general fund reductions.
Charles?
Yes, go ahead.
Questions on the Keith Swenson successor. Could you repeat her name, please?
That is Ambar Aljar is her name. Ambar Algera. And I will provide her contact information to you. So once you decide who the chair of the committee is going to be, let me know, and I will provide both the contact information for Alger and also the questions that were on the last job announcement that I have recorded. So that'd be kind of confusing.
Provide those to Joel. Joel's the chair.
So Joel is the chair. Okay, very well.
Could you just put that out to the full board, Charles? Just because it'll come up at each of our next renewals.
Okay. I can submit that. I'll maybe just circle back with Mark on that particular point, and we'll go from there. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. With respect to the IT modernization update and the CP extension, I've got some other things. I don't think it was Okay, I want to also mention that we have been impacted by the furloughs. There was a kind of a hair on fire moment with the governor's office where they implemented the furloughs in very, very short time frames. Our staff did a marvelous job. Jen and Lori worked very, very hard to implement dates and to get the furloughs established for our office and our staff. And the time frames in that were very compressed because the governor's office wanted staff to be able to take care of the available unemployment funding that was available due to COVID-19. And in all cases, we've got maybe one staff that's still having some difficulty, but just about everyone got their benefits. I thought that was very important and a great effort was done there. And so I really don't have anything else. But Jim was going to then go ahead and talk a little bit about the IT modernization project.
Okay, thank you, Charles. So, piggybacking on what Charles was saying, with this new norm, and on top of the fact that we had to deal with the furloughs, which in July we furloughed every month for the entire month except for this last week. We also, if you see on our website as well, we will be furloughing one day in August 24th, September 28th, October 12th, and November 2nd. Been working really close with the vendor. They understand. They're working with us to assure that we're still on track for this IT implementation. The new system is still on track to be up and running in December. I know we had until June, but we're trying to accelerate it, and really why we're really trying to hit December, because I did let the project team know that come January with the renewal, and being the fact that this is a big cycle, I will not have time to really implement a new system within renewals right away, right in January. We'd have to wait a little bit. I just want to make sure that everybody would be able to get into the system. This project contains 6 what they call epics, and we're finishing up successfully completing epic number 1, which was the core configuration of the system. I just want to give a huge kudos to staff. I think this vendor was surprised to see full engagement. Every single one of us here on staff were testing. We gave our back really good feedback. We pushed them as they probably weren't expecting. I said we have a tough group here in ATV, but I think we're going to get the best system we can. Very proud of everybody. We're finishing testing. We're doing the first epic. The next epic consists of some of our applications, and we'll go through that way. So there's 6 epics. We're finishing 1. Other than that, everything is going really well, considering our new norm, considering the fact that we had the furlough. We're still able to get in there, test, and I don't know if anybody has any questions about that. The next thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about.
Jen, can I interject just one thing here with the budget? One item I omitted from my report was that we had some concerns about the level of expenditure from the OCIO desktop support thing that we've gotten ourselves involved in, and we've been talking to OFM on that particular point, and our budget person, Paul Batar, and we are going to be submitting a decision package this next go around to kind of reduce our obligation to that. That's all I have. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, no problem. So we were successful in the renewal of this year, the 2020 renewal. We did implement, due to the rule change, WAC 430, 134, and this year, it was the first year that everybody was given the opportunity to use the extension request for renewal, so they didn't have to let us know why they couldn't complete the CPE by December 31st. We did not have to ask any of board members for it. If there was our previous way we did it was if there was more than 16 hours that they needed, they had to get that approved by a board member. So I just wanted to give you some numbers a little bit. We had successfully had 3,694 individuals renew, and out of that, 332, which was pretty high, did request that extension request. So they were given that. They were able to complete their CPE in a timely manner by June 30th. And so I feel, staff and I felt like, this was a pretty high number compared to what we usually see. I don't know if some of that had to do with the COVID as well, even though they were supposed to have their CPE done by December 31st. But, They always let me know that COVID hit, and so they weren't able to complete the CPE by December 31st. So we know that. Nick, I would imagine what the board and what we're going to, we're already thinking about now is not so much this year, the fact that they were able to get the extension. It will be in 2023 when these individuals come back, and the rule is very specific on the fact that the individual is only allowed one CPE extension in any 2 consecutive CPE reporting periods. So that is something that we're going to have to look into and tackle. Let's hope that these same individuals will not be asking for it back in 2023, but we will wait for that. We won't borrow trouble, but that is out there for us to think about. Other than that, I think that's it from us here in operations. And Charles, unless you had something else.
No, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. We appreciate that. And again, the modernization project is a huge project for an agency of this size, and it's all very transparent. There's a website where all the documentation is for basically the public to take a look at if anyone has any interest in that. With that, moving to the enforcement report. Taylor.
Hey, thank you, Mark. As you can probably see in the numbers of the enforcement report, we've been able to keep the caseload down to quite a low manageable level. I think the flow of complaints coming in has been a little bit slower as well. Kind of tying back to what Tom Neal was talking about earlier with the AICPA records requests, a lot of the complaints we've been seeing lately have been people trying to get their taxes done on time, partly due to trying to obtain the stimulus, and how those CPAs provide records to their clients. One of the specific cases did involve providing them via an online portal. So I'll be very interested to see how that develops, because that could make our lives much easier to have very spelled out guidance on that front. With regards to the CBM report that Mark had mentioned, it does list out the number of cases that have been delegated to various board members as CBMs. We really appreciate all of you with your time helping us out on that, especially as it's a little bit more unique with our current circumstances. So we've been trying to make that process as easy as we can for everyone involved. Going slightly out of order to talk about the sanctions and basis for disciplines and costs and fines and all of that. I did get a request to kind of elaborate a little bit on how we come to those recommendations in our case report. Because sort of the CPM works in isolation with the enforcement team. Looking at the cases when they happen to be a CBM on them, we kind of come to our conclusions based on our experience with the kind of historic body of work that we've been working on, at least with me, Charles, and Kelly, and Jennifer, particularly over the last 7 or so years at this point. We try to be very consistent in as much as we can, where every case is a little bit different. But we try to be consistent in the fines and the fees, both with the historic cases and also kind of using the board policy 2004-1, which is for remedial resolutions, but kind of use that as the launching point for some of our discussions that don't fit into those categories. And before I dive into the CPE deficiency presentation component, does anybody have any questions about the enforcement reports or the sanctions or any of those other parts? All right, excellent. So CPE deficiencies, we can skip ahead a couple slides here. Yes, this is kind of just an overview. We can go to the next one. So this is kind of looking at how we used to handle CPE deficiencies. If you can go to the next slide, Tia. Thank you. So essentially, I'm looking at this through the lens of a CPA license, just so we're all kind of thinking the same language here. Each renewal, a CPA needs to complete 120 hours of CPE, and in accordance with board rule, they need to have the documentation for that, should they be requested to provide it, and that CPE needs to be completed before December 31st of the year prior to when they submit the renewal application. So essentially this issue comes around when someone in the renewal application or through an audit says, I didn't complete the 120 hours of CPE. So that's kind of where we're starting with this. Next slide here. The potential outcomes for those who failed kind of fall into three different baskets. There's those who are kind of divvied up based on Board Policy 2004-1. If they're under 60 hours, they would qualify for a remedial resolution, which are sort of pre-approved sanctioning terms by the board that are kind of reviewed every year at the policy review meeting and more often as needed. If they're over 60 hours or the CPA respondent does not agree with the remedial resolution, then it can move to the statement of charges / consent agreement process that Charles and Bruce were talking about earlier, which is a higher level of formal discipline. And then the third bucket is if they just straight up don't respond. So they submitted their renewal application earlier in the year. We asked them to provide their CPA or their CPE documentation, and they sent no response back to us, which is not terribly uncommon. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the issues involved in this, which is not the only issue, but is the time involved to handle these, because we can get potentially a couple dozen of these each year. And under the process we were using, a remedial resolution, as you can see, involves a handful of people. If it elevates the level of the statement of charges and consent agreement, we start involving a lot more people, which includes the Assistant Attorney General, eventually board vote by everyone, board clerk, and it gets expensive and is very time consuming for everyone, including the respondent, and kind of delays kind of correcting the issue. Go ahead and move on to the next slide here. Yeah, so this is just sort of the high level issue. Essentially, the CPA failed to have their CPE for whatever reason, and there's the various resolutions we have and kind of the time involved in all of those processes. So you can go ahead and do the next slide here. So looking forward, this was prepared for the April board meeting. This is kind of what we've been doing and plan to do henceforth. Go ahead and do the next slide here. So really what this came around as, we had a CPE case, and we were talking with our AAG as part of this, and we were looking at our rules and statutes, and essentially the CPA has to furnish the evidence of their CPE to the board, period, should we ask for it. They may have reasonable cause to take longer to provide it, but ultimately they have to complete their CPE by December 31st. And these are kind of the specific citations for that. And the interesting part of this, which is a little bit different than how we had been handling it with the board policy, is if they do not complete their CPE, then their license will lapse. It's pretty clear language in the rule and statute, and has kind of been our guiding hand in how we're looking at approaching this differently going forward. Next slide, Tia. So from the time it takes to do the CPE audit to the conclusion and the disciplinary process, it can potentially take months, which, as I mentioned earlier, kind of delays kind of correcting the issue, or getting everybody right on the right path. During the CPE audit, we would try to contact them. Kelly handled a lot of that. She'd go through a lot of extensive efforts to try to make that happen. And in the cases where they would not respond, it includes multiple letters, sometimes phone calls, emails. We do what we can, but it's not always easy to get that going. Next slide here. The big important component as well here is due process. We're trying to structure everything to be in line with the Administrative Procedures Act, our rule and statute, and give the CPA every opportunity to be aware of what's going on. So the way we would essentially be handling this is through the CPE audit. The CPA would be notified you did not complete your CPE, and that we at the board staff level would be denying that application, their renewal application. As a part of that notification, they would be given the notice that they can appeal that through the brief adjudicative proceeding that Mark and Bruce talked about earlier. If they do not file that, then we would simply lapse their license either 30 days after the date of their notice or July 1st, which would be the expiration date, whichever is the later of those two. Next slide here. And this is kind of just recapping what I just talked about, so you can skip ahead. And this is kind of the BAP process, which we've talked about here as well. Next slide here. I think you can skip this slide. This Bruce covered in a little bit more detail already. And this is kind of, again, spelling out how that BAP process works. They have 30 days to request the BAP. If they don't do so, then their license would simply expire because their renewal would have been denied. If they want to go through the BAP process, that would normally go to the board chair. As Mark indicated, he's going to share the wealth of these as they come up. And so it'll be the board chair or designee, and then a vice chair or whoever is appointed should the person appeal that first review. Go ahead and do the next slide here. By comparison with this process of lapsing the CPA license for deficient CPE as opposed to going down the disciplinary process, there's a lot less people involved. And the benefit is, the time and money saved on our end and on the CPA's end, because sometimes there would be a lot of back and forth. The process becomes very unclear when it spirals from, you're 4 hours short on your CPE to suddenly there's a statement of charges, potential for hearing, consent agreements if they don't agree to proposed terms. So at the most extreme here, we're looking at involving the board clerk, the CPA, a vice chair or presiding officer, and an AAG to review. And that's it. It's much simpler, it's in alignment with our rules, and it's easy to explain.
And Taylor, I just want to point out one thing. This is only people who want to appeal it. So this is an appeals process. If people fail the CPE audit, they didn't have enough, well, then they can reinstate.
Absolutely.
Go through the reinstatement process. So this would be only those who decide to challenge that. And our staff, our staff really try to work with people and try to be as flexible and as reasonable as possible. So this is only, again, those who choose to appeal it rather than just applying for reinstatement.
Right. I guess I should clarify that a little bit more, yeah. Essentially, they would submit their renewal application, and potentially through a CP audit, we would find they're deficient. And we would send them that notice, we're going to deny your renewal application unless you file an appeal, essentially. And if they don't file an appeal, then essentially they receive that notice, and then 30 days later, their license is lapsed. If they do the appeal, then it does go through this brief adjudicative proceeding process.
One kind of question about the timing. So they fail the CP audit, so they can reinstate. Now they've been it's not it's basically the day they renewed their license that wasn't deemed to be a valid license application, but the date it's known the failure of the CP audit is months, maybe longer than after the fact. So they've been holding out as a CPA during that time period between the conclusion of the CP audit and really when they renewed their license. Does that factor into any of this, or is this?
It's going to be interesting with our new system that we're developing, because in part we'll be able to kind of audit their CPE in real time. So there's the potential that on January 1st, a CPA on top of everything could submit their license renewal application. We could find that they're deficient in their CPE, notify them in February, your license is denied unless you provide more. And then they could come around in April and say, oh, I found, the 100 hours of CPE I was missing, and submit that renewal application before that July 1st expiration and be good to go. There is indeed, though, the chance that, if they submit it on June 30th, we don't find out until maybe August, notify them, and then their license is lapsed, then once it's lapsed, they shouldn't be holding out. And that's part of the reason for that 30-day window from the date of the notice, is if they're not going to appeal, that would in theory give them time to make sure they are not holding out. And
Okay.
I think that's something that we'll have to be sure.
So it's really not going to be retroactive where where they would separately go, for example, through the separate remedial resolution process. It's like we're kind of giving them notice that their license is kind of prospective.
Exactly. Yeah.
Prospective lapsing. Okay.
Can I ask a question? This is Carol, and you bring up something that I was going to ask about. During the process, do we alert the CPA holder that their license is right now in a flux and that they should not hold themselves out as a CPA? I mean, is that a responsibility that we have till the documentation is reviewed and a determination is made? Because I don't know, is that part of the letter process? I haven't seen what the process looks like, so just wondering is it incumbent upon us as a board to ensure that this individual understands their license right now is in question and in like a limbo state?
I think as a part of this, through the CPE audit, I'm not sure we've done it in real time yet, as we look for a new system soon. But if they're short on documentation, we may be following up with them asking for more. So they should be aware of that. At the most extreme, we would send them their notice that we intend to deny their application unless they want to appeal, in which case they could provide more documentation and information at that time. But I don't know that we have the letters constructed yet for that, but I imagine we could certainly include spelling out if your license does lapse, you will not be able to use the CPA title. If you do use the title while your license is lapsed, you would be in violation of the Public Accountancy Act. So I think we can go that, unless there's any objections during that process, I think we can try to make sure that very clear for the respondent, to emphasize both, here's how you follow the statute, and to make sure they have all the information in front of them as well. Does that help, Carol?
Yeah, and don't forget too that when an individual so you got to think about timing. When an individual renews, so I'm up for renewal this year. Individuals up for renewal this year. They're technically valid until June 30th, right? June 30th of the year. So they could come in and renew on February 2nd, and at that time they're attesting that they've met their CPE. So when we do our audits, we have to wait until after the complete renewal, and then so we start doing audits in August, right? So yes, there is that time, Carol. I do understand that there is that time. You would think from because they could have technically retired their license or allow it to lapse as of June 30th, July 1st. So from July 1st through whatever date that they get sent that audit notice, they are using the title, right? Because their license is now active until the next following 3 years, until 2023, if they were to renew this year. So we do understand that, but let's just remember too that this isn't a huge population. Most individuals do have a CPE and they are able to, submit that CPE documentation. We do sometimes have individuals that have left the firm and they can't acquire that CPE from that firm. And so they're scrambling and we're working with them. So they may have completed the CPE. Unfortunately, they don't have the CPE documentation, which it is their responsibility, but we do try to work with them on that as well. But I think this process will help kind of streamline that and help us get where we need for those who really didn't do the CPE or really just miscounted, that they have an easy way to go ahead and lapse, and then they could just go ahead and reinstate whenever they complete the CPE. That's our hope.
With the new system that we're putting in, could we find out we have a much higher failure rate? I'm thinking of, like a decade ago, New Jersey audited everybody, like 20,000 people, like a third of them failed or something like that. Because right now we're kind of on the honor system.
Right. In the new system, they they will be required to document all of their CTE credits. So the hope is that we'll be able to see that right off the bat now.
Sure.
And the problem, and the problem is sometimes they take it, of course, you just can't find that certificate of completion. Like I said, their firm, they may have taken it through one of the bigger firms, they've left. Unfortunately, they didn't grab all their certificates and what they needed to do, and so even though they might have taken those classes, we wouldn't accept those because we don't have the proper documentation. So, but yes, we're hoping to get everybody up front, and that way it pauses them too. They'll be able to look at that and say, oh, I actually don't have the 100 point. And before, you have to remember too, we're also going to be dealing with the 20-year minimum that they're going to have to be required to do. There's other things that we're hoping, putting it all in the system, they will be able to see and track it for themselves.
But everyone also gets automatic extension for first-time offenders too, which makes it easier, right? With more accountability when they're renewing, and then we have automatic extensions, so they can rectify the problem themselves.
That's the idea.
Excellent. I think that'll be one of the big advantages of the automatic extension process, and then this lapsing for individuals who did not get an extension and didn't complete their CPE. It's just between all of those processes, everything is far more clear to all the stakeholders in the process, essentially. And the CPA can have something that they can see very clearly what happens if they don't follow, instead of this ambiguous, more ambiguous, here's a remedial resolution. If you don't agree to that, you can go to hearing, or here's a consent agreement, or here's the plethora of other options kind of in front of you. So, next slide here, Tia, would be good. So, kind of about the BAPs, like Mark indicated, a BAP only comes around when their application is denied at the staff level and they appeal it. So, if they don't appeal it, like I mentioned before, they simply lapse. If they do appeal it, they go into this BAP process that we may be getting more of in the upcoming year. People dispute those findings. But that's about it. You can do the next slide here, which is kind of the summary of the things in this presentation here, kind of the disciplinary process we used to go through, the new process that we're using that's in alignment with what's spelled out in the RCW and the WAC, and ultimately that CPE matters, and this hopefully gets everybody to correct any deficiencies more quickly, and then you can look at a licensee. If they're active, you can safely assume that they're current on their CPE. So this is a protection in a way for the consumers as well. So it kind of covers, I think, all venues. So if there's no other questions, that wraps up my end here.
So, any questions for Taylor?
Nice job, Taylor.
Thank you, Joel.
I had one kind of administrative question. We have, Board Policy 2004-1 is kind of remedial resolutions. I think we need to edit that now because it also has a section on CPE deficiencies.
I think we'll need to strike probably the entire section that talks about CPE deficiencies. Okay. I think we had a draft going for that. I don't think we got it quite in time for this one, but that will be something that we'll remove, and then all CPE will just go down this lapsing process.
Okay, fantastic. Any other questions for Taylor? Okay, with that, we are not going to have an executive or closed session. If there's anything, because it's impossible to do over Teams, and we priorly sent out an email about kind of one thing on the board. Now we move on to public input section. I think one person signed up to testify, and that was Ken. So Ken, it's you're up.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. I'm going to go through, I think, 5 items, and if it's possible for whoever running the screen to pull up the RCW Chapter 18.04, that would be cool to see the exact sections I'm talking about, but if not, I do understand. The first item, I want to be very clear that I'm not here on my own behalf. I was brought into a situation by a local government who was having a significant amount of difficulty with that local government. I'm looking at documents as I work today, public records with stats and other things, showing harm, significant harm, both to persons as well as finances, for tens of thousands of individuals and hundreds of millions of dollars in this one entity. And then the state auditor, which is the complainant, whom I guess I'm raising these people's concern. I'm here as an agent on their behalf, audits, things, many for vulnerable people, many for public dollars, millions of people, and billions of dollars. So the reason why I persist in bringing this issue to, it's a huge scope and reach. This one audit, tens of thousands of people and hundreds of millions of dollars under audit, and then for the 2,000 audits that this entity does is very large. So that's point number one. I'm here on the behalf of others, especially third parties who don't necessarily know how to advocate or understand the process. Number two, there are 2 items in the minutes from the last meeting, and there was 5 bullet points. I appreciate that. We're all accountants. We know how to kind of do bullet points and keep track. One of them was a request for formal board discussion with public outreach concerning audits of Washington municipalities and state government. So that was the request earlier, and I didn't mean to be rude in my response to Chair Hugh, but the request was for a process where everyone in the public who's impacted by this could participate in understanding what the board's position is and what they would like the board's position to be, or if they're frustrated with it or getting clarity. So that was not met. And I want to be very clear that that was an explicit thing. And I think as accountants, we're used to reading very carefully. That was public outreach to talk about the State Board of Accountancy's role for the oversight of municipal and state audits. The second item there was, if the State Board of Accountancy is not going to provide substantial or any real oversight, especially when a constituent has a concern about the audits by the state auditor of a particular entity, that the State Board of Accountancy engages in the process to fix that section. And so if you could click on the 1804-015, the purpose, I very much appreciate you pulling this up, the very, very top one. It includes the words there in the very first 1A, governmental. It also includes under 1B to protect the public interest. And I believe it is the board's duty to be more proactive than you have, and I'm frustrated by that. The third item. So there's a set of facts that I think we can all agree upon. And so 3A is that the state auditor does engage in the act of, or the practice of public accounting. They issue audit reports, they're sent to the SEC, they say they do auditing, they mention the words auditing and accountability, they do exit conferences. So everything about them is the practice of public accounting. So I think that should be stipulated. No one should be able to disagree with that. Point B, 3B. There was a complaint submitted to the State Board of Accountancy relating to a specific audit, and I was advised early on in that process not to go into details like you talked about today, and I have not gone into any details. But there was a complaint against the state auditor for a specific audit of a municipality that was never investigated. Okay, that was never investigated due to the interpretation of 1804.350.12. So if the person on the screen could go back to the main menu, 1804, go down to 350, thank you so much, and then scroll down to 12. And if you could highlight it, that would allow everyone to see it. So it says, nothing in this chapter prohibits any act or the use of any words by a public official or public employee in the performance of his or her duties. And part of the response back in the initial work was that this is from the Uniform Accountancy Act. Sort of. The Uniform Accountancy Act is applied by several jurisdictions. I think it was something like 22, but I don't remember the exact number. Organizations have some phrase of this, but the way it's being interpreting, I think, is inconsistent with the UAA, and I don't think it's consistent with other states. I believe the board could or should ask, can you give us a detailed analysis? Are we the only state that that basically exonerates our state auditor if the state auditor does audits from any review of their practice of public accounting? And then the last, that was item 3. Item 4, the state auditor, I have recently seen, has a dispute process at their website. They have an audit dispute process. The problem with that audit dispute process is it's the ability for management to dispute with the auditor. as all of us know, the main role of auditors is for these powerless or less powerful third parties, stockholders, voters, the parents of children.